Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a structured, highly analytical look at one of the most infamous buildings in America, the Stanley Hotel. Now, if you're drawn to the unexplained, you already know the spooky stories. But what we're going to do today is absolutely fascinating. We aren't just here to rehash the legendary lore, we're going to break down the rigorous, strict scientific methodology required to actually investigate a location like this. So get ready, because we're about to see exactly how serious researchers separate the myth from the measurable. To really understand the modern obsession with this hotel, we actually have to start right here. That night, I dreamed of my 3-year-old son running through the corridors, looking back over his shoulder, eyes wide, screaming. He was being chased by a fire hose. That is a direct quote from author Stephen King, describing a terrifying nightmare he had back in 1974. He woke up literally within an inch of falling out of bed, lit a cigarette, and by the time he finished smoking it, he had the bones for his legendary novel, The Shining. And you know, that nightmare didn't happen just anywhere. It happened at the Stanley Hotel, nestled high up in the Rocky Mountains in Estes Park, Colorado. From the outside, it is this stunning colonial revival estate, but for decades, visitors have reported that this beautiful building just emanates a deep feeling of wrongness. It's a vibe so unsettling that it shakes even true blue skeptics to their core. But the big question is it actually haunted? Or is our perception just totally colored by pop culture?
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our agenda for today. First, the legend of the Stanley. Then, tools of the trade, establishing a true baseline, ordinary readings versus anomalies, and finally, ruling out the ordinary.
Starting with Section 1, the legend of the Stanley and the history of a haunted landmark. The whole story kicks off with F.O. Stanley. He was a wealthy steam automobile magnate from the East Coast who moved out to Colorado in 1903 trying to find a cure for his tuberculosis. And actually, his health rapidly improved in that crisp, dry mountain air. But he missed his luxury lifestyle, so he decided to build a grand resort. The Stanley Hotel opens its doors in 1909, and it operates as the world's very first fully electric hotel. But just 2 years later, in 1911, a massive gas explosion rocks the building. Then, decades pass, the hotel kind of falls into disrepair, and then we hit 1974, when Stephen King arrives for his fateful, solitary visit on the very last night before the hotel closes for the winter season. And that brings us to a very specific number, 217. This is the most requested room at the entire hotel. Why? Because during that 1911 explosion, the power had gone out, and head chambermaid Elizabeth Wilson entered room 217 to light a candle. She unwittingly ignited a gas leak. The explosion literally blew her through the floor and into the dining room below. Miraculously, she actually survived, broke both her ankles, and kept working at the hotel until the 1950s. Today, guests swear her spirit still unpacks suitcases in that room. And as fate would have it, room 217 is the exact room Stephen King slept in during his 1974 visit. King later said about his stay, "It was like God had put me there to hear that and see those things." Now, whether King actually saw a ghost or was simply overwhelmed by the incredibly creepy atmosphere of an empty, echoing hotel, well, that's up for debate. But guests and staff continually report bizarre phenomena across the property. We're talking piano keys moving on their own in the ballroom, phantom children laughing in the empty halls, and sudden, inexplicable drops in temperature. So how on earth do we scientifically test these claims?
That brings us to Section 2, tools of the trade and measuring the invisible.
If you've ever watched one of those late-night ghost hunting shows, you've definitely seen investigators creeping through dark rooms holding blinking gadgets, trying to measure the invisible. But if we strip away the paranormal marketing for a second, what do these tools actually measure? According to Dr. Marina Antoniou, an electrical engineering expert from the University of Warwick, these tools do not have a ghost detecting setting. They measure entirely ordinary physical properties. An EMF meter? It measures radiation from man-made electrical wiring. A Gauss meter? Subtle fluctuations in everyday electromagnetic fields. A spirit box? It's just scanning standard AM and FM radio frequencies. Let's break this down even further because it's absolutely crucial. If an investigator points an infrared thermometer at a wall and it reads cold, they might get excited and claim they found a supernatural cold spot or an entity. But an infrared thermometer only measures surface temperature, not the ambient air. Point it at a drafty window frame and of course it's going to read cold. An EMF meter will spike wildly if you hold it near a hidden junction box, a refrigerator compressor, or, just a regular cell phone. So an untrained investigator is constantly at risk of tricking themselves into thinking a totally mundane mechanical function is actually a supernatural event. Which leads into Section 3, establishing a true baseline and the science of the paranormal.
In serious scientific paranormal research, jumping straight into a dark room and reading the meters is literally the biggest mistake you can make, because those readings mean absolutely nothing in a vacuum. A baseline is a deliberate, systematic survey of a location's normal environmental conditions. Think of it like going to the doctor and having them take your resting heart rate. A sudden spike in your heart rate only means something if you already know what your normal resting rate is, right? So the crucial point is, without establishing a baseline in a haunted location, you have absolutely zero reference point for what is actually abnormal. Setting up a proper baseline requires some really rigorous steps. First, you have to sweep the location before witnesses tell you where the spooky things happen. You do this so your expectations don't bias your data. Second, be systematic. Move room by room and log the data identically every single time. Third, take readings at multiple times. A single sweep is just a snapshot. Taking readings across different times of day accounts for the sun moving, the traffic picking up outside, or the HVAC system cycling on and off. And finally, you map the mundane. Note every single draft, every creaking floorboard, and every hidden fuse box.
Section 4, ordinary readings versus anomalies and what the data really means. Once we have that exhaustive map of the ordinary, we really start to see the difference between amateur thrill-seeking and serious methodology. And this brilliantly illustrates the point. An untrained observation sounds like this: "High EMF in the kitchen." That's just an emotional reaction based on an ignorance of the environment. But a proper baseline comparison sounds like this: EMF at north wall elevated near refrigerator compressor at 9:14 p.m. One of these claims they found a ghost, the other correctly documents an appliance cycle. Let's relate this directly to you for a second. Have you ever walked into a dark room in an old house and felt a sudden icy chill? Your brain might immediately jump to something spooky, but an investigator armed with a baseline map knows whether that room just naturally runs 3 degrees cooler every single night because of an uninsulated exterior wall. A reading is just data, and an anomaly is a reading that deviates meaningfully from your established baseline, where absolutely no obvious ordinary cause can be found. Finally, Section 5, ruling out the ordinary by applying the Logester razor. Let's see how all of this builds into a cohesive scientific framework. When we apply this strict methodology to a place like the Stanley Hotel, a ton of those reported experiences instantly resolve into completely mundane causes. Huge spikes on an EMS meter? Traced right back to faulty century-old wiring inside the walls. Sudden chills? Mapped directly to drafts from the HVAC systems or uninsulated exterior walls. Even intense feelings of dread, which people report all the time in supposedly haunted places, can frequently be tied to low-frequency infrasound. This is sound vibrating from heavy traffic, high winds, or heavy machinery that you can't consciously hear, but it actually messes with the human nervous system and makes you feel terrified. It all comes down to this core principle: rule out the ordinary first. Honest, rigorous research isn't about proving the extraordinary exists. It is about measuring the ordinary so carefully and so meticulously that the genuinely unexplained has nowhere left to hide. You aren't trying to prove you found a ghost. You are trying to prove you found a draft, and then carefully seeing what is left over when you fail to do so. So as we wrap up this explainer on the legendary Stanley Hotel, I really want to leave you with a final provocative thought to chew on. When you strip away the Stephen King novels, the scary movies, the humming refrigerators, and the drafty windows, when you meticulously measure the ordinary down to the very last detail, and you finally find a data point that deviates from your baseline with absolutely no logical explanation, what truly hides in the unexplained? Thank you so much for joining us, and stay curious.